And now, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Bartlett Russell.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. All right. So even with the earliest stages of AI, we've seen formal research into human-machine teaming of all sorts. But most often we think about this in terms of a single human or a single agent or maybe a small number of each. But unique features in human-machine teams start to emerge when you start to scale, when you get to more complex sets of human-machine teams. In fact, coexisting heterogeneous teams may be better understood, if we think about it in this way, in terms of ecosystems, maybe instead of teams. Now, of course, this is what I'm going to be talking about today, is what we're calling scalable human-machine ecosystems, emergent behaviors that exist or that emerge, come out when you get to more complex structures. But of course, this is also not a new problem, and I'm not here to tell you how DARPA has solved it. I'm here to say and frame this old problem in a new way, hopefully to get new thinking, hopefully so you, as part of our research and performer base, can come up with new ideas about how you can help us at DARPA solve this problem. So please keep that in mind as you see the studies and the sort of anecdotes that I have for you today. So like I said, this is not a new problem. In fact, it's pretty much, human-machine teaming has existed almost as long as our species has. And it's had pretty wide-ranging effects on societies. It starts, of course, with simple tools that help us with simple tasks. But with the agricultural revolution, when farmers started to create more than they could eat themselves, started to get the beginnings of an economy, and it changed the relationship of the individual with the state. In fact, it made the state necessary and in some cases even possible, especially in rice farming communities where you needed communal flooding in order for those regions to prosper. Then, with the Industrial Revolution, with the advent of replaceable parts, with assembly lines, now we see the rise of industries now has power alongside the state, a different kind of societal change. Most recently, of course, we have the communications revolution, which gave rise to communities that are no longer bounded by geography. In all of these cases, the societal change came with great prosperity. But of course, darker features also emerged at scale. So considering this history, considering how this has emerged over time, what we're asking today is, how can we build scalable, resilient human-machine ecosystems that are both prosperous and resilient, whether at the small organizational level or if you're at the global scale? Instead of looking just then at the unit, what if we thought about this problem in terms of how to design the right scaffolding around which these ecosystems can grow? And if we think in terms of scaffolding, we're now thinking in terms of designing incentives that give rise to the kind of healthy behaviors we want to see. We think about the kinds of conditions in which these ecosystems can prosper that promote human rights and democratic principles. And we think about creating healthy tensions, like competition, that drive and accelerate innovation in the same way that ecological pressures will also drive evolution. So what if instead of trying to design the system itself, we used incentives, conditions, and healthy tensions to design, to measure, and adapt a right scaffolding that gives rise to the resilient human-machine ecosystems that we think is going to support our democratic principles? We don't have to look far to find examples of how human-machine partnerships have changed to have profound effects on our world today. We've seen a lot of these examples from Ukraine. It's obviously because it's topical, but it is also prescient. For example, the supply chains that have been quite efficient during peacetime have been shown to be quite easily disrupted under wartime. Very fragile. We need to think about this. One UN study said that an additional 50 million people are going to suffer destabilizing hunger as a function of the war in Ukraine. That's pretty wide-ranging effects. This interconnectedness is already apparent. The empowerment of the individual also is. We hear reports constantly about how independent hackers have taken it upon themselves to defend their homeland by independently attacking Russian websites. Grandmothers armed with smartphones revealing the position of enemy forces. It's pretty inspiring. It's also scary how much power a single individual can have enabled by these capabilities. The speed at which these machines are helping us do things is also a hallmark of this new era. After just a couple encounters with Russian jamming, Starlink was able to push a software patch overnight that thwarted Russia's attempts to shut down the internet in Ukraine. Again, it's inspiring that these tools empower individuals to fight back against despotic leaders, but it also highlights certain vulnerabilities that we have and we have to think about, such as what if one of these people wanted to attack our energy grids? So now you're asking, why scaffoldings? It sounds rather boring. Why scaffold? That's not the important part. It's the stuff in the scaffold. Well, I think it's because there's some really good historical precedents as to why scaffoldings can be pretty powerful. The first example here comes from the Pacific Railway Act of 1864. This act is best well known for establishing the first transcontinental railroad, the first time that the East was connected with the West via rail. What's less well known about this is that it also standardized the gauges upon which rail cars ran. Prior to this time, individual companies determined the gauge or the distance between the tracks that a rail car could run on. So any area that was dominated by a given company ran on that track. That meant that cars in the north couldn't run on southern track, and neither could go west. You can imagine the logistical problems this created. But by standardizing the gauges, you can see in just a short amount of time afterwards, you see an explosion of rail across the nation. And with it, not only did it enable a person to be able to get from Omaha, Nebraska, to the West Coast, what previously took 6 months by wagon, we've all played Oregon Trail, right? 4 days by rail. That's profound. It also had the societal impact of giving rise to what many historians call the first true united American identity. So the vast expansion of the railroad, however, it needed additional innovations to stay healthy. In order to manage all the comings and all the goings of rail cars across what is, you can see, a pretty gnarled system, came the advent of standardized time and time zones. This is why you always see conductors with their pocket watches. More recently, of course, on the other side of the slide, you see something from 100 years later that is very close to our hearts here. It is the ARPA network. The ARPA network, plus standardized messaging protocols, provided yet again a scaffolding on which, of course, internet grew and the communications revolution began. In both of these cases, it was the interplay between government creating a standard and industry providing the engine that led to the vast and rapid expansion of the system, vast complexity that created emergence of entirely new industries by creating new niches, as an ecosystem does, and that also led to rapid societal change. Now, it is, of course, not all good. Just as the Industrial Revolution led to some unhealthy societal side effects, such as child labor, rapid urbanization without things like public sanitation, the same is true, of course, the information revolution. This is a map of all the countries in which technology is either eroded or called into question election integrity, through state-sponsored misinformation campaigns being one of them. And this is because in many cases, you think about it, the wrong incentive structures can exacerbate rather than balance out certain tendencies we have as humans, cognitive biases. We gravitate towards people who think like we do. We feel comfortable with ideas that are consistent with our own. And as such, then you see things like echo chambers emerge, which start to erode what we think is actually true. So just as the railroads needed the advent of time zones, a new innovation in order to stay healthy, One of the questions we're asking here today is for both our current problems and those that we anticipate seeing in the future as human-machine teams become even more ubiquitous in our societies, is what are the innovations we need in order to keep these ecosystems healthy going forward? So I've been talking about global scale, but we don't even have to scale very far to start seeing some of these images or some of these issues emerge. This is a meta-analysis done by one of the granddaddies of human factors engineering, Chris Wickens, and it examines the ability of a human to essentially manage automated systems. This study ranked studies according from those that included systems with the lowest automation at the origin out to the highest level of automation along the x-axis, and then measured along the y-axis how many functions a single individual could manage using that system. And the green line is, of course, why we're doing this. With increased automation, we see that a single individual can do far more. This is great. This is the point. This is what we're all hoping for. Now, unfortunately, that relationship only holds in expected context and situations. And when you hit an off-nominal or an unexpected condition, you see the opposite, the red line. Essentially, the more automated the system, the more catastrophic the failure in the face of unexpected consequences, unexpected context. So you say, why not just reduce cognitive load? And indeed, a lot of the people in the community have been driving towards exactly that. And that's what you see in the blue diamonds there. Unfortunately, even with reduced cognitive load, you don't see this problem go away. Unfortunately, it is the ability to adapt and impose unexpected conditions on one's adversary that determines an outcome. So this trend, to me, is deeply worrisome, something that we're working to try to address. But as we engineer our highly automated and autonomous or AI-enabled systems, we really do need to consider also the scaffolding between the human cognitive systems and their machine counterparts to build this kind of adaptive resilience. Without better human-machine interfaces, we lose that potential for collective intelligence that we hope we're going to get from these partnerships. But take it a step farther, the right kind of scaffoldings can also get at just as important but squishier topics such as the legal, the ethical, legal, and societal implications of technologies that we build. This is an example. This is DoD Directive 3000.09. This is the document that came out about 10 years ago that stated that autonomous systems developed for DoD would be designed in such a way that operators will be able to exercise appropriate levels of human judgment over the use of force. And this was great. It was stating explicitly this was our goal. More recently, and I think as you heard in the last panel, DoD has adopted the responsible AI principles, putting more meat on the bone of what they mean by this, including the responsibility, equity of those systems, traceability, transparency, and governability. And already, some of the companies who want to create systems to sell to the DoD have started training their engineers in AI on what these mean and what they are. So already, create a scaffolding to get the system to respond. And that's great. It's a wonderful start. It does, however, beg the question, how do we know when we've got it? How much understanding of an AI-enabled system do you need to exercise responsible control, appropriate levels of human judgment? That's not a direct answer. Like, it's hard. How do you measure that? I don't need to be a chemist in order to understand what cold weather does to my car's range, my electric, my battery. It's going to shorten the range. I'm not going to be able to go as far. I don't need to be a chemist to do that. You don't need necessarily to be a computer scientist in order to manage these systems. I hope not, because otherwise we're going to have a problem. But still, how do we measure it? This has been a topic of some research here at DARPA. I think you heard a little bit about it before. In particular, we've been testing a process we're calling DevEthOps, a way of integrating these ethical, legal, and societal questions into our engineering process, not when the prototype is ready for test, but rather when it's just a twinkle in an engineer's eye and during that early paper-to-prototype stage of development. and throughout its life cycle. We discovered in this process that if you engineer at the most basic levels, at the code level, with these ethical, legal, and societal implications in mind, that you can actually enhance an operator's ability to act in line with the values we hold dear as Americans. I'm really excited about that work. So it's worth stopping for a minute and asking what makes these systems so difficult to understand, especially at scale. So there's a couple of features. One is that they are interconnected and highly, highly complex. They're non-deterministic, right? So for any given input, you cannot predict the output. That's a big challenge for those of us who like reproducibility in science. Additionally, they are beyond nonlinear, they are non-ergodic, meaning no matter this, because the system is constantly evolving, even if you had a perfect digital twin version of it, it would inherently erode and decay in accuracy over time. They're self-reflexive. They're second-order chaotic systems, meaning they react to their own predictions, thereby invalidating the prediction. And of course, they're very fast. They allow many faster actions at scale, rather than measured, thoughtful, and innovative responses that we're really looking for. If we don't engineer it with those kind of cognitive considerations in mind, we might end up with systems that instead empower our reactionary knee-jerk responses instead. Finally, it's extremely hard to study and describe these systems using traditional reductionist methods. So new methods for even studying them are needed. I apologize, my animation. Sorry, there it is. All right. So if not through these traditional reductionist methods, are there ways that we can begin to understand the complexities of these systems? As I was working on this with a number of my other colleagues in DARPA, we were putting together, this is our list of what we think is a way to think about it. Is the team composition, what is it like, how large, how heterogeneous, how evenly distributed is that heterogeneity? Is it even or lumpy? What are the temporal features, of course? How fast do you have to make decisions? How fast should you make decisions? If it's slow, how do you keep the human engaged? But also dimensions like, are responsibilities divided? How much is shared? How much can one team member pick up another team member's responsibilities? And are the team members self-reflexive and are they self-aware? I think we can all agree that as much as humans, we like to think that we are self-reflexive and self-aware, we are not always. So aspirational for both members of this kind of team. This is merely the surface, and I don't mean to say that this is the only way to do it. In fact, I do hope that as you as a community working in this space think about it, you offer alternatives. Are these going to be right all the time? Nope. In fact, I'm pretty much sure this is going to be incomplete or wrong in some way. That's why we do the work. But it is important to think about it because if you think about heterogeneity, for instance, if you have more than one type of agent within these systems, then you know you need more than one kind of coordination scaffolding to make it work for all the types of agents in the group. Okay. So the next little time here, I'm going to just touch on some of DARPA's current work in this space. This is more to give you a flavor. This is not, again, to say that DARPA solved the problem. Here, aren't we great? Look at what we're doing. We are great. We're doing some cool stuff. But this is only scratching the surface. It's about the diversity of elements and ways of looking at similar problems. So the first is how can machines be better partners, of course, and how can humans aid machines? The in-the-moment program, or ITM, is asking whether human-aligned algorithms can be developed and trusted to make life or death decisions in cases where a human might not be available, or maybe even there's no right answer, in cases such as like mass casualty triage. The EDGE program, or Enhancing Design for Graceful Extensibility, is dealing with that scaffolding issue I showed earlier on the lumberjack effect of how do you create the interfaces that allow a human operator to adapt with a highly complicated system, non-deterministic, autonomous system. We have programs that push the science of AI in order to make AI-enabled systems better partners. This includes knowledge management at scale and size. The KMAS program really will appeal to anybody who started a new job recently. and spent at least the first 3 to 6 months trying to just learn all the unwritten rules about how things happen in a new organization. That's what this one is aimed at. Can you capture institutional knowledge and deliver just enough of it just in time to just the right person on that? The Sail On, or Science of AI and Learning for Open World Novelty program, is taking direct aim at one of the biggest problems for AI today, and that it does not work well in new contexts, in new situations. So they're doing this partially by creating a theory of novelty and then also imbuing the AI agents with these capabilities. We have social science to improve AI and AI to improve social science. The ASSIST program, or Artificial Social Intelligence for Successful Teams, I think the program manager is over there, I think I see him, is developing shared mental models between humans and machines to improve teaming. And the Habitus program is scaling something known as participatory modeling using AI tools, which is participatory modeling is a very user-intensive method, be scaled with AI to create hyperlocal causal models from local knowledge to enable decision-making in operators, say in stability operations. So that's all fun, and I love it, and I'm sure any of the PMs would be happy to talk more about the programs. But what's most exciting is, of course, looking forward. The next part of the talk, I'm going to touch on a couple of studies and a couple of ideas that we as a group, when we were thinking about this talk, most excited us, that gave us hope for positive outcomes in this realm. So in thinking about creating the right scaffolds are really just the structure upon which the ecosystem grows. Incentives are the engine. They're what drives things. How do you design the right incentives? The wrong incentives, we know, give you bad outcomes. There is research, initial research, looking at how do you engineer incentives. This is a study in particular by Helbing and Mann that looked at different kinds of incentives. In this case, individual incentives, in particularly this scientific community use case, reduced the diversity overall of information and that overall led to less accurate outcomes. On the contrary, the incentives that didn't diminish a minority perspectives, that didn't beat them out of the negotiation, ended up being the most accurate at scale. So whereas individual incentives might have done better at lower levels, at scale, it was the ones that kept those diverse opinions in that did better. This is obviously a very simplified model, but it leads us to consider how we can think about this more purposefully. Additionally, we think about the health of the scaffold. If we build these scaffolds, if we build these networks, how do we maintain their health? How do we make sure that we have, especially when they're moving at a high speed, problems might emerge at a speed far faster than we can react to them. And this is great in some cases where you have the same feature of speed allows things like the Cajun Navy to emerge and help out in saving people after these are boat owners who helped after various hurricanes along the Gulf shores, Louisiana and Texas. They self-organized using social media to help save people. They wouldn't have been able to do that without these properties. However, it also means that failures can have pretty dramatic scaling effects, or cascading effects at scale. In which case, do you need to have a certain number of trusted nodes in order to ensure you don't have mass failure? Things that are known as Dragon King events, such as in this study. So what I mean by this is if you think about traffic alerting, our traffic system, it's a network of roads and laws, signals, GPS systems telling individuals where to go. Without the traffic lights, our trusted nodes, we have a problem, right? It wouldn't work. Now, any one or two of those traffic lights can go out and we won't have a serious issue at scale. But if you have all of those traffic lights go out at scale, then you could have a mass failure and paralysis. This study looked at how many trusted nodes can you erode before you get the emergence of these Dragon King events. Again, this is a simplified study, but it does beg the question of how we can build on results like these to anticipate questions like how do you instrument these scaffolding to keep things healthy. We also like to anticipate future challenges we see at scale. I'm sure a number of you have seen this graph already from the MIT Technology Review. This is the carbon footprint along the bottom of a single transformer network. It is exceeding dramatically the carbon footprint of even an average American in a single year. If we apply, now this is a very big transformer network, but it's still, if we apply AI to all the areas in society and all the areas of our lives that we want to, we have a different scaling problem, one that our planet cannot sustain. So if we want to do this, we're going to have to develop more efficient computing and enable systems and societies that we envision to become. So can we maybe look to nature for inspiration? Now, I'm a cognitive scientist, so I'm going to come up with brain examples a lot. You'll just have to bear with me. Although I'm certainly not the first to do so in the area of AI. But really, the brain, I think we all know, achieves a level of compute power and a mere fraction of the power that we see in our silicon systems. And it certainly is an existence proof, and it may offer inspiration for solving this problem. That's just one example. We see there's dramatic reuse in the brain in a way that we don't often think of in our AI systems. New problem, new neural net. Maybe reuse can help us with some of these issues. Just one idea. Because of those comparisons to the brain, of course, there's been a lot of projections about how soon we're going to get there. When are we going to achieve this? This is one projection from about 10 years ago from the Blue Brain Project, and it says we're just about to get there next year. I think this is a little optimistic. I don't think we're going to get there next year. And I'm an optimist most of the time. Projections like these are based on a really simplified view of how the brain works, just on synaptic connections. There's been a lot of good computational neural work that have shown, from Gallistel and King in particular, that show that there's just not enough synapses in the brain to enable this kind of computation that we do every day. So instead, there's other options. There's other things that we can be inspired by. But we did have interesting progress on this front in just 2021, just last year. And that was in the modeling of the behavior of a single pyramidal neuron with 99% accuracy. And it equated to about 1,000 artificial neurons for just one biological neuron. So you can see we've got a ways to go. There's many levels of computation the brain conducts in, whether it's in analog or digital form that we haven't yet accounted for. The bad news is we are not there yet. But the good news is we've got a lot of inspiration to draw from. So along the lines of healthy tensions, I talked about this earlier. This is the kind of example that I mean by healthy tensions. This is a study that showed that with increasing polarity, we see increased polarization among people who are editing Wikipedia articles, that you actually get better outcomes. So in other words, the articles that had more people editing back and forth on the topic, that had opposed each other, ended up putting out higher quality articles. In science, politics, and social issues, it didn't matter the topic, it generalized across the base. But of course, this wasn't by accident, right? This happened because there's good structures in place with Wikipedia, which came from, that governed that they're enforceable policies, they're strict guidelines, and they're community governed in a way that makes this a positive outcome, as opposed to what we often see, which is the opposite in these kind of bickering and trolling and chat and threads. So we know it can be done. We have, an existence proof. And we know that it's not the absence of polarization that gets us there, but actually harnessing disagreement. Teams of rivals can get us to better outcomes, right? So it's those healthy tensions. How can we harness them? You might say, well, the internet is, of course, the ultimate place for cognitive diversity. We will have the most cognitive diversity in the internet. And that should be true. But unfortunately, we don't have the ability, we don't have infinite time, and we don't have infinite ability to interact with all the people we may want to. Social connections don't scale linearly with increased access. This is a schematic from some things called Dunbar's number. She's a researcher, and she looked at the size of the cortex of an organism and then saw how big their social circle was. Projected that for humans, based on the size of our brains, that 150 is about the ideal number of a social circle. They say, well, in hunter-gatherer times, tribes are about that big, da-da-da-da-da. You say, well, yeah, today, though, I've got a pretty good LinkedIn connect. I've got like 700 people. I'm pretty good. Yeah, but how many of those people do you actually interact with, right? Not to mention, there is just time constraints, right? So whether or not Dunbar's number, which is hotly debated, is actually valid, there are time constraints. You can't talk to everybody you want to. But what that means is, in these forums that we currently have, we're selecting who is in our network. If it doesn't scale, and we are more selective about who we put in that network, and we tend to gravitate towards people that we agree with, we're inherently reducing the diversity in those communities, in our communities, and we're reducing our own exposure to cognitive diversity. There are so many positives in these platforms, and by that I mean social media platforms. There must be ways to construct these scale systems that we get more of those productive outcomes, as opposed to the ones that, that are less, that show off our less good selves, right? Interestingly, one of the most popular websites here, or one of the most popular social media sites, the median number of people, of connections that people have is 200, which is way lower than I would have guessed. I was very surprised to see that stat. I don't think it's necessarily validation of Dunbar's number, but it is pretty interesting. So as we think about it, though, again, what innovations, like time zones were for railroad systems, what innovations could we bring into these environments, into our digital human-machine ecosystems that can help keep these healthy as well? Indeed, science itself may need to reconsider its own incentive structures. This is a funnel plot which charts the effect size of studies on the same topic. So if you should find the true effect size just because the reported effect sizes in studies are going to naturally oscillate around the true effect size. But of course, you see the gap in the normal distribution, or what should be a normal distribution, near the null end of that curve, right? Near the abyss of non-significant results. So this is called the file drawer problem. This will be no secret and no surprise to anybody who is in academia. This is the publish or perish. This is a result of publish or perish. Because of the incentives that publications say they want to publish findings, not null results, you see incentives for only publishing the good stuff. And that unfortunately affects what we think we know about the world. Credit to a number of publications who are proactively changing their publication standards and saying that if you come to us with a really good, important question and a really good way of testing it, we'll agree to publish your study before you even know what the results are. So they're changing their incentive structures in order to improve the outcomes of science itself. So I've presented just a few ideas here today of how we can think differently about this old problem, new approaches, a couple studies on how to harness the power of these heterogeneous human-machine ecosystems, and with it, the collective intelligence that we hope will improve the greater well-being of all of humanity. This occurs at many different levels. But if history teaches us something, I do want to just take a moment to say that technology is not deterministic. It doesn't just naturally happen. I think we look at charts of Moore's law and just expect like it will be one day. It really happens in our own image. It happens because it's imbued with our values. The Ukrainians have been enabled to fight back against despotic leaders, Russia, against this superpower, because the tools they are using were designed specifically for free information flow and to empower the individual. That wasn't by accident. It was because that's what we value, and that's what we created because we value it. We see these negative emergent features as well, and it might be uncomfortable, we should also think about that and how we might want to correct, how we might want to hold a mirror up to ourselves. As we continue, though, to innovate in this space, it really is critical to consider how the structure and drivers of future innovations will either lead to or erode the resilient, prosperous societies that we want. I really do look forward to hearing more from you all about this problem space. I hope framing this old problem in potentially a new way has spurred some thought. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Hello again. First question for you. You mentioned that technology is not deterministic, but won't we always drive toward certain outcomes? For instance, don't we always want to get inside an adversary's OODA loop, and aren't we always going to drive for faster actions?
Yeah, I suspect this resonates a bit with a couple people in the room who might be in the military. Yeah, so the OODA loop, for those that don't know, it's the observe, orient, decide, and act loop, where if you want to decide and act faster, essentially, than your adversary and control the decision space. Of course, we want to control that decision space, but there has actually been some interesting work where being faster is not always better, not just because it can be our knee-jerk reactionary selves that maybe not the thoughtful responses that are advantageous to a good outcome. But additionally, you can get so tight within that OODA loop that there's not enough time to respond or even think about what the action meant, and you instead induce chaos. And nobody can respond either way, and there's no way to even, there's no control on either side, and that's not something we want to do either. So yes, we're always going to want to do some things faster, but I would say in the decision space, there might be very good reasons to slow things down.
Okay. Just a reminder too, if you would like to submit a question using the virtual event platform, if you're in the room, just scan the QR code, and online, of course, you can just submit it directly. Regarding the Wikipedia example on polarization, can you comment on the causal relationship they studied? And did polarization lead to high quality, or did high quality lead to more polarization?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I don't know if the study was instrumented to answer the causality question. I will say, though, that the author of that study, James Evans, looks at a lot of these types of questions in how to accelerate innovation and how to do so with ideas from people who don't always agree. He was actually a panelist at one of our other DARPA Forward events, so you can always look back to his panel and see what he has to say about it. But I will say they did look again across a number of different articles. I don't know if they looked over the course of time to see, as people edited, whether that led to then an increase in the quality. I can imagine that would be a good way to test that question. Good, like our experimentalist asking questions here.
Can AI ever be responsible? Making a policy is one thing, but making it a technical reality is another. And then it's a double question.
Yeah.
What do you think can be done in this space?
I love this question. So I sit on the human side of the engineering disciplines. So, but really, I want to take a moment to just say that AI is just a tool that a human or humans will use to achieve an end. And so at some point, the human using that tool is the one that has the responsibility. However, AI can certainly erode that person's ability to act responsibly if they aren't well informed, they don't understand the tool well enough to use it appropriately. But if you build the tool in a way that they do have that understanding, you can thereby extend that operator, that warfighter's inherent virtue, because they're trained in the ethical use of force. That system should be able to extend that inherent virtue and allow them to act responsibly. So yes, I do think that we can be responsible, but only if it is used responsibly by the operator. In itself, it can't be court-martialed, right? We can't court-martial AI. So.
Using the brain analogy in your mention of scaffolding to support resilient human-machine interfaces and systems, what are the analogous non-neural or support cells or mechanisms that we need to uphold the scaffold over time?
Yeah, that's interesting. So this feels like a question, I'll be honest, out of my comprehensive exams back from when I was getting my PhD. So I can extend the analogy a little bit farther, is what I think I hear this question asking, and saying like, glial cells, which they create the myelin, which wraps around your neurons, which makes transmissions much faster and more and less likely to erode over time. I can imagine a whole lot of inspiration you could get from that kind of care and feeding. That's not just the neuron itself, but the functions, the care and feeding functions of the other cells in the brain. But yeah, I think I'm wondering if my advisor is in the room somewhere with this one.
Just a reminder, if you have a question that you would like to submit, you can use the virtual event platform or scan it if you're in the room. Next question, do you have thoughts on how to develop information synthesis or decision-making processes that perform well as information flow is restricted, and then in parentheses, as in a contested battlefield environment?
Yeah, this is, I do have some thoughts, hopefully optimistic ones on this front. We're always going to run into a case where there's just too little information, in which case you have to empower that operator isolated to just make the best decisions that he or she can in the conditions they are. But I will offer also that we as humans often seek out more information than we necessarily need to make a decision. We'll make our decision first, although implicitly we won't consciously know we have. And then we'll seek out more information to give us comfort in that decision rather than actually to change our minds. There's some really good analysis going back a while now in Hurier's book, has a book on this in terms of intel analysis, in that analysts would often seek out more information, not to change their minds, but rather just, they didn't need more in order to make the decision. They'd already made it. So from that line, it might be less than we think we need, especially on quick on-the-fly decisions. But eventually, we are going to have to enable that frontline operator to make those critical decisions independent of the maximum amount of information we would desire.
Okay. And then the final question
Yeah.
is, do you see a role or relevance of emotional intelligence in human-machine interactions?
I do. Yes, I think I do. And I think not just for the applications we tend to talk about at DARPA, but obviously for a lot of the applications that AI is being developed for, like home care, people who need assisted living, say, for people who aren't ready to go into a nursing home, but they want to stay in their own homes. That kind of thing, I think, is going to be increasingly important. I think that emotional intelligence is also kind of a double-edged sword. We sometimes will think about this in terms of being able to get the responses we want and engineer the responses we want, instead of how is it helping the quality of the outcome we're after. So I see a lot of this in like the trust literature. Let's make humans trust my AI. Well, maybe you shouldn't be trusted. Maybe that AI shouldn't be trusted. Maybe we should drive towards a competent AI, and then the trust will come afterwards. I thought, the ACE presentation yesterday did a nice job of talking about calibrated trust, and I think that's just one example of where, trust is a kind of emotional intelligence, but we have to think about it in terms of what is the thing we're ultimately trying to measure at the end.
So great.